I think we need to create an environment where if you admit to not knowing something, it's not something to be embarrassed about. You need to normalize that idea that, oh, I don't know something, I want to learn something. But I think in Thailand, there's still that kind of norm that if you don't know something, let's say if someone asks me a question and I don't know the answer to that question, it feels like, oh, I've done something wrong. Like me not knowing that is such a big mistake, right? When actually it's not, right?
Before we begin, I hope you dear viewers and listeners forgive us for any grammatical and language mistakes made in this talk. Even though we want to try our best to perfect it, what's most important for us is to get the message across. So we try not to be held back by the fear of making some mistakes. Thank you for your understanding. Now, let's jump right in. For this episode of The Lesson Learned, we feel so honored to have this special guest with us. He's going to share great insights about how we can use technology to best personalize our learning, what quality education should look like, and how we all together can help create a learning society. He's currently the CEO of Start D, an educational app, the Netflix of education, and this is พี่ไอติมค่ะ Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome พี่ไอติมค่ะ
Hi guys, สวัสดีครับ สวัสดีครับ
Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot tell you how thrilled I am.
So my name is Parit Watrasin. My nickname is Aitim. I'm currently the CEO and founder of an education technology startup called Start D. We developed an application that tries to democratize access to high quality education using technology. As a side project, apart from my full-time role at Start D, I'm also kind of campaigning for constitutional amendments. So that's kind of an extension of some political work that I'm doing. So that's kind of my two main roles at the moment.
Okay. All right. So you're a man with a million jobs, I can say. Maybe yes. a lot of things going on right now. But the first thing that, because we here in the lessons and we talk about the learning experience a lot. So of course we have to start with a topic about you getting to, go study abroad, and not just anywhere abroad, but to the top schools in UK. Yeah. So can you maybe give us your academic background a little bit?
Sure. So I started school at Saathit Jula demonstration school. So that's a primary state school in Bangkok. Then when I entered secondary school, I spent a couple of years at an international school called Shrewsbury International School before kind of ending up getting a scholarship to a secondary school in the UK called Eton College. It was actually a bit of a coincidence that I ended up in the UK so early because I basically spent kind of one summer studying at a UK primary school. And to be honest, it was a bit of a nightmare because I couldn't really communicate English back then. So I didn't have a good time, and I ended up kind of coming back to my school in Thailand. But during that one summer, the headmaster of that school basically, I don't want to say this, but basically kind of brainwashed my parents a little bit, saying that
to that extent.
Yeah, so if Aitim kind of had stayed on at that primary school in the UK, he could end up getting a scholarship to a good school, a good secondary school in the UK. So then my mom took that quite seriously, and then when kind of I turned 13 at the age where I was considering secondary school, she decided she asked me if I wanted to try and take a scholarship exam to Eton College. So I kind of took a punt on that and ended up getting in, to my surprise as well. I went through kind of a different route. So that was like a 1 week long scholarship exam where students from all over the country and all over the world, I guess, including myself, would come in and take a 1 week long exam. And then they would kind of select the top, I think like 13 or 14 students per year to give a kind of a scholarship to come and study at Eton. So yeah, so that's kind of how I ended up there.
I see. Of course you get you're the only 15 person to get in, so there must be something special about you. What do you think is the main thing that get you into Eton College?
Well, up to this day, I'm still not too sure. But I think one thing that Eton try to teach us, and they use that in their scholarship selection process as well, is they try to instill belief within us that we don't have to be good at everything, right? No one needs to be good at everything, but you just need to find what you're good at, what you enjoy doing, and then kind of maximize your skill sets and maximize your strengths on that particular dimension. So during that 1 week long scholarship exam, I was asked to take like so many tests, right? Math tests, English tests, geography, science, history, etc. And most of the tests I actually couldn't do. But I think there were a couple of papers where I ended up scoring quite well, and I think that's probably how I got in. There was one paper called General Paper 1, where they try to test kind of your critical thinking. So you get questions like, let's say for example, you have an apple tree in your house, but the branches has extended into your neighbor's house, and then the apple falls on top of the head of your neighbor, and then he got injured. So how would you defend yourself in court? So I mean, they don't expect you to know any law, but they just wanted to see how you would kind of how you think, how you analyze this problem, how you kind of structure your answers. So that was a paper I scored surprisingly well. Yeah.
Do you remember?
I don't remember
your
what
answer?
I said. I don't remember my answer.
I was so curious. I really want to know, like, I don't know, like, threaten them or like, I don't know, like,
I'm
give
sure
them
if I
money.
answered that, I wouldn't have got in.
That's why I didn't get in any top school, because that's about like how my minds work. Oh, okay. That's very interesting. So, but you kind of have to defend your like propose an argument and defend it why
Yes.
it would work in the best way, right? Oh.
Yes. So I think that they just wanted to understand how you would solve a problem, how you structure your thinking. So that's kind of what ended up happening. So once I got in, I remember having a conversation in kind of the first few days with my friends who also got a scholarship. And it turned out that actually most of us, we didn't get like a good score across all exams, but we would have like one or two things or one or two papers that we got a really high score in. So for me, it was like general paper and math. There was another person who like did very badly in math, but scored very high in English and French, for example. So I think that's kind of from the first day. That's what kind of Ethan tried to instill within us. That belief that you don't have to be good at everything. And I think that's actually a very valuable lesson. And I think it's in contrast to what a lot of students in Thailand feel. Right? I mean, if you go to a Thai school, there's almost an expectation that there's only one single recipe for success.
Exactly.
If you want to be loved by your teacher, if you want to have like a picture of you framed in front of the school, you have to like get a 4.0 GPA across all subjects, right? So I think that for me was probably the first time where I really felt that I was getting a different type of education experience.
Let's go back a little bit to critical thinking skills that you mentioned, right? Because you did really well on that. What are the exercises, what are the practices or the lessons you had before, taking those exams that help you develop critical thinking skills for that?
I don't think there was any preparation specifically that I did to prepare for those exams. But I guess one thing that my teachers and my parents have commented in the past is that I was always quite a curious kid. So
เป็นคนที่สงสัยเลย
ใช่ครับเป็นคนที่สงสัย so wherever I go I always ask like a question of why even when I was since I was very young, and I think that kind of curiosity is probably the first step towards me kind of developing critical thinking skills, right? I would ask why to like any question, big or small. Something like when we went into like a parking lot, right? Sometimes you get given both like a hard card and also like a paper slip, right? So I always have this question in my mind, like why do they have to give both? as a ticket for the parking lot, because surely only one would work.
I think a lot of น้องๆ actually ask, probably you get this question. Do you get this question? พี่ไอติมเรียนอะไรดีคะแบบหนูจะเรียนอันนี้ดีหรือว่า you get this kind of questions as well?
Yeah. And I think one tip I can share, this is a tip that was passed on by Run P or someone older than me, was don't think about what you want to become, but think about what you want to do. Initially, I didn't understand that, right? But what he was trying to say was that don't think about whether you want to become a doctor, become a politician, become a policeman, become a soldier, but think about what you actually want to do on a day-to-day basis, right? Because if you say, oh, I really want to become a doctor, but I don't want to be called to suddenly rush to a hospital 24/7. I don't want to be stuck in the same workplace every day. Then maybe becoming a doctor is not something you really want to do, right? But try to assess what the daily routine of each professional job requires, and then make a decision based on that as well. I think that was a very helpful tip for me, and that's something I can share to others.
It is. I really hope a lot of น้องๆ or people entering university get to hear this as well น้องๆ คะหรือว่าไม่รู้รุ่นไหนกำลังดูอยู่ตอนนี้ ก็ช่วยส่งต่อสารนี้ไปสู่น้องๆ ด้วยนะคะ I think it's a very crucial thing and I think it's a huge decision to make at when you're like 17, 18 and you kind of have to choose like the path that you are going to stick with for the rest of your life. It's very big. So I think having some this kind of lessons would be very helpful. Okay, now that we talk about where you studied, maybe do you have any tips? I'm sure like these are the top schools in the world that it must be very challenging somehow to be able to study there. What do you think is the biggest challenge that you have ever have to solve or have to overcome?
I think probably the most challenging thing for me, but it's a good challenge to have at an early age, is self-discipline. When I went to a school in the UK, it was a boarding school. So it's not like back when I was in school in Thailand where I go to school in the morning, come back home in the afternoon. What that means is you need to have self-discipline in terms of planning out your days, right? So if you get set like homework, there's not going to be anyone going around your house saying, have you done your homework? Have you prepared for this exam, right? But you have to manage everything on your own. So I think that was kind of an early test for me in terms of being self-disciplined enough to manage my own time. And then when I went to Oxford, I think that test became even more difficult because of the way Oxford teaches its students, right? When I studied at Oxford, and because my course was an arts degree, so Saisin, not a sciences degree, actually the number of mandatory or compulsory learning hours that I had to attend each week was only about 2 or 3 hours per week.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's not like we have like a series of lectures where people would check if you attend or not. We have this system called tutorials, whereby like your professor would set a question for you, let's say at the beginning of the week, and then by the end of the week you have to kind of come up with an answer, and then present it to the professor, either like one-on-one or two-on-one. So throughout the whole week, there's no one to kind of like watch over you or check if you're doing your studies or not. It's up to you how you plan out your studies. So the question could be very broad, right? So for example, like in politics, it could be a question like, do you think capitalism works or not, for example, on political ideology? And then they will give you like a list of books that you could go and read, but they give you like a list of like 100 books. So they don't expect you to read all of them, but to kind of find snippets here and there, and then kind of come back with your own personal answer, which you're ready to defend and ready to be grilled by your professor.
Sounds so scary. Sounds even more scary than lectures.
Yes, it's scary. And I remember in my first year, I ended up having a lot of late nights, like the night before the tutorial, because obviously like you have 1 week to do it. So in the first few days, you feel like, oh, there's no need for me to do anything now. And then you end up having to kind of rush everything, like have like a last night miracle.
Yeah, that's the deadline actually is the best motivation, I guess.
Yes, and then you begin to kind of learn to have that self-discipline and to manage your time well. And I did a lot of extracurricular activities at university as well. So that meant it was even more of a challenge to manage my time.
Now that we talked a lot about your academic background and also what your study tips or learning tips already, let's jump right into your role as a CEO of Study, right? It comes from I just learned that it's come from the word study.
Yes. We spent a long time trying to come up with a name.
It's so cool.
Study, yes, which is it's a play on word for the word study. But it's also, I think, it's quite a touching name for me as well, because when we try to come up with names, right? We went around to visit schools, and we would ask students like, what do they think of this word? And when we said the word study, it's like STUDY, we said what do you feel when you hear the word study? All of them came back with like very negative answers. They said like they felt concerned, they felt stressed, they felt like worried, and that's not something we want to create as an image for education in Thailand. We wanted to kind of flip that image because education should be like a good starting point for everyone in their lives. So that's why we wanted to flip from study to study, so like a good start for everyone.
โอ้ทำไมดูดิทำไมเนี่ยถ้ามีใครถามว่าแบบทำไมถึงชื่อฝรั่งอ่างหมอช่องคือไม่มีคำตอบอะไรดูดีแบบนี้เลย People are having a hard time even searching for the channels right now. Anyway, as you already mentioned about Study, so I really like how you talked about it as the Netflix of education, and that it's even more interesting. So you mentioned in the beginning that it's an app, a mobile app, right? And it's a education platform. So maybe can you give the overview for people to know what exactly is Study doing?
Sure. So I think we were set up to try and solve a social problem, and that social problem that we're trying to solve is the problem whereby good quality education in Thailand is something that is very difficult to access, and I think there are kind of three key barriers to that, right? Number one is there's a question of whether the entire education system in Thailand is high quality or not. Because on the one hand, we noticed that Thai students spend the most number of hours in school compared to other countries. So we spend a lot of time, a lot of effort in schools. But whenever we compare skill sets of Thai students with students from other countries, we always come quite lower down the table. So the latest kind of ranking, PISA ranking, right, which is a standardized test used to measure the skills of secondary school students across different countries. I think we came somewhere between like number 50 to number 60 out of 79 countries. Like we're way below Vietnam, we're way below Singapore, we're below Malaysia as well. So I think first barrier is that entire education system. We're not sure if it's high quality or not. The second barrier is then the inequality between schools, right? We see that you have kind of the top schools in Thailand can produce students who become like champions of the world, right? They go and win awards, they go and win like Olympic medals. But that's not what most schools in Thailand are like. Right? If you look at most schools in Thailand, they tend to be what the Thai system calls โรงเรียนขนาดเล็ก or small size schools, right? And these schools tend to have not just inadequate kind of teaching resources like computing resources or teaching equipment, but some of them also lack the number of teachers. So then we notice that not only is the average kind of standard of the curriculum may not be so good, but there are also varying qualities between schools. And then the third barrier is that if you end up going to a school that's not such good quality and you want to find kind of learning content outside schools, you then are met by a culture of kind of cram schools and tuition centers, which tended to be very expensive. So I asked kind of people in my company how much they spent on additional tuition back when they were in secondary school. A lot of them said like tens of thousands per year, or some people even said like 100,000 baht per year, which is something which most people cannot afford in Thailand. And even for those who can afford it, should not have to pay for it. So kind of those are the three barriers to getting a good education in Thailand. So what we wanted to do as Study was to destroy those barriers by using technology. Right. So the equation for Study becomes if we can kind of plug like good quality learning content into people's smartphones, then at least we make high quality education more accessible. So that's kind of in one sentence, our mission statement is how to democratize access to high quality education using technology.
ก็คือทำยังไงให้ทุกคนสามารถเข้าถึงการศึกษาที่มีคุณภาพได้มากยิ่งขึ้นเนาะ I feel like when people ask I don't know if like what's wrong with the education in Thailand, it's very hard to say in one sentence or to say like just that one thing because there's so many things, right? Of course there are many aspects and areas of things that we can do to develop and improve in Thailand. Why education out of all problems?
Okay, so I think if you look at all the problems that a country like Thailand faces, I think a lot of the problems that we face can be solved kind of partially with education. So for example, if we say that we are facing an issue of stagnant economic growth, so เศรษฐกิจไม่ค่อยเจริญเติบโตนะครับ and we are stuck in this middle income country trap, right? Let's say if we want our economy to grow, a very crucial aspect of that is to equip the people in our country with the skills that are suitable for the labor market in the future. So how do you make sure that we equip our students who eventually become our adults to be equipped with the skills that are required to get a job in the future, right? And with technology coming in and replacing a lot of the jobs that we are used to, that kind of necessity of kind of updating our curriculum is even more important. Therefore, that's why if you want our economy to grow, you need to adjust the education curriculum to be more in line with what's required in the future. That's why I decided to focus on education, because I feel if you're able to reform education, a lot of the problems that we are facing can be partially solved.
I see. So everything can be traced back to like all the problems and everything that we are trying to solve can also be traced back to how one is educated, right? And then if we can really being able to improve on that, then it would have a direct or indirect effect on everything else that's happening.
Yes.
I really like. I did stalk you a lot of your interviews, obviously, and you talk about personalization, as you mentioned, like Netflix of education, and you talk about personalization a lot, which I really into. And we talk a lot about personalization in this channel as well, of how you can personalize your own learning, to best fit your learning style, your customization of learning and stuff. Why do you think like we need to personalize even for learning? I mean, for preference is fine. Like, okay, I want to watch this movie, so it seems like business related. Netflix, they want us to keep binge watching. Why do we need personalization in education?
Yeah. So I think for me, and this is my personal theory, I think like the utopia of education is personalized learning, and the simple reason for that is no two kids are the same, right? If you start with that assumption that no two kids are the same, they're not the same in terms of their strengths, their weaknesses, they're not the same in terms of their learning processes or their willingness to learn, then that makes it necessary and optimal for you to vary kind of learning content, learning experience, vary instructional techniques in the way you deliver content or deliver information to each different child or different adult actually. It's not just for children. So for me, I think that's why personalized learning is so important, right? How do you kind of optimize the way you teach, what you teach to different kids to cater to their preferences and their needs? And I think there are three key benefits for that, right? Number one is personalized learning is probably the most effective way of learning. Because let's say if you're someone who's very good at maths, but the teacher ends up spending a lot of time teaching very simple maths, which they already know, then that kid is going to be very bored. It's going to feel like his lessons are a bit of a waste of time because he already knows what the teacher is saying. So you need to deliver content to that kid that is slightly more difficult, more sophisticated to really push him to the next level. On the other hand, if you have someone who's not so good with maths and you keep feeding very difficult content to him or difficult questions to him, he is not going to be able to learn in the most effective way, because if he's not strong with the foundational knowledge first, he is not going to be able to solve a more complicated problem. So he needs to be kind of taught kind of the more foundational level content first. So I think number one, personalized learning is effective because it really solves the problem for each student. That may vary between each person, right? Someone might be confused about one thing, another child is confused about another thing. So therefore you need to solve different problems for each student. I think more importantly on that, not only is it effective in terms of varying the difficulty of content, but also the style of how content is delivered. Because if you're someone like me, right, I learn with kind of a visual thinking method. So I tend to remember things in shapes or remember things in pictures, right? So that's why if you want to teach kind of me something, then if I see something written down, it's going to be much more effective than if I, let's say, only listen to the teacher speaking via a podcast, right? On the other hand, you also have students who learn better via auditory learning, so via listening. So you have to vary instructional techniques for each person as well. So so that's number one. So I think it's more effective. Number two is I think it's also more empowering. And I want to quote, I think Albert Einstein on this, but he said, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to live its whole life thinking that it's not very clever, right? I think
I love this.
that's another benefit of personalized learning because if you apply the same set of standards to measure everyone, if you try to design an education system that measures everyone with the same ruler, there are of course going to be people who are not good when measured up against that standard. So if you have like a personalized learning and personalized assessment to measure each person based on their strengths and give them advice on how to become even stronger with their strengths, then I think that's quite empowering in the same way that that fish is no longer going to live its life thinking that it's so incapable, even though it has a tremendous strength in terms of swimming. Right? And I think thirdly, it also creates a better sense of ownership because let's say if you go onto Netflix, right, and let's say you only watch kind of standard set of series and everyone gets the same experience, you're not going to feel like you own that Netflix, right? Because it's the same set of content that's being delivered to every person in the entire world. But if you can create your own playlist, if you can have kind of personal recommendations about what type of series you should watch, then you feel like actually this is my Netflix, right? The thing I see on my screen is going to be very different to what another person sees on his or her screen. So I think education is the same. So if the education curriculum can be more student-centric and give students more choice in terms of what they want to study or what they want to learn, then I think they will feel more engaged with their studies, and they will feel that their studies are much more relevant to their lives because they've chosen that particular module or that particular type of content. They're no longer being forced to learn things that they don't feel cater to their preferences. So I think it's about effectiveness, it's about empowering, and it's also about that kind of ownership and engagement, which makes personalized learning, I think, the utopia of education.
That is amazing. How do you think that the technology actually helps students and any learners personalize their own learning? Like what are the mechanisms that actually allows personalization more than a typical classroom?
Yeah, so I think there are two ways technology can help with personalized learning. One is kind of directly, and then secondly is as a complement to offline learning. So I think number one in terms of the direct impact that technology can have on personalized learning is the ability to, let's say, analyze huge amounts of data on learning behavior and learning preferences in order to kind of analyze what type of learning content this person might want to see. So for example, it's the same with kind of other applications or other technology platforms, right? I think it's fair to say that at the moment your Facebook probably knows more about you than potentially your closest friend. Right? Because, and I'm sure you've had this experience as well.
Right.
So
I'm so haunted by that.
Yes. So if you end up like saying that you wanted to go to Japan, like casually to a friend, the next thing you know is that when you turn on Facebook, you see like advertisements about the cheapest flights to Japan coming up. So
Exactly.
So this is
Like
from
a ghost.
kind of basically, yeah, like a ghost. So this is from the technology's ability to really analyze and critically analyze your behavior, right? And I think what we try to do at Study is something similar, but hopefully not as creepy. But we try to understand kind of each student's learning behavior, right? So for example, if someone comes in, answer these types of questions correctly, but these types of questions incorrectly, we try to use kind of the data that we have to analyze what type of things we feel that he probably or she probably didn't understand, and then we would kind of recommend that video to that student, right? And you can play around a lot with the data that you can't do if this was entirely an offline experience, right? Because if it's an offline experience and you have a classroom filled with like 100 students, it's impossible to monitor the behavior or understand the feelings of each individual student within that big classroom. So I think that's a direct impact. And I don't think personalized learning at a scalable level is possible without technology. But the second kind of impact that I think technology has on personalized learning is the ability for teachers to use technology to complement their teaching in schools through a concept called flipped classroom. Right? So for example, in the world where we don't have technology, students have to come to schools to basically absorb content. The teacher's role is that of giving information to students. So for example, before there was technology, if you want to know what happened in the Second World War, The quickest way is to come to a school and then the teacher would spend 1 hour lecturing about what happened in the Second World War. But now because we have technology where students can actually search about the Second World War via Google or via other websites, then actually that role of teacher is no longer as necessary. But that doesn't mean that teachers should be displaced. But what it means is that it actually unlocks.
I'm gonna lose my job.
Not at all, because it actually unlocks teachers' ability to do a much more meaningful task.
Exactly.
So instead of the teacher having to spend 1 hour of his or her class lecturing one way, he or she can potentially record that lecture online first, and then he or she can curate that content and set it as homework for students to watch before coming to attend the class. And then the teacher can spend the entire class doing kind of group activities that is better for developing skills and much more engaging for students. And that, of course, is not possible without technology.
I really feel a lot of people, I think a lot of teachers as well, like we have like a network of teachers where we help like train them, support them as like, English tutors. And I think a lot of them kind of have this fear that maybe like, will technology replace us? Like maybe like they don't have to come to us anymore. They can go find everything out on YouTube or on Google or now on Study. But I feel like it's a really, if we really know how to utilize it and maximize the benefit of technology, I think it helps us, makes our job so much easier. And I think the students also enjoy much more learning on their own and be able, like you said, like the sense of ownership. มีความเป็น active learner. I guess like ก็มีความแบบอยากดูตรงนี้หยุดเมื่อไหร่ก็ได้ว่าอยากหยุดจดก่อนอันนี้ขอดูช้าลงได้ไหม or something like that. I feel like these are the things that actually should be helping the learners more than actually for us to be scared of right now. But now that we talked about online learning a little bit, I'm sure a lot of people are still quite skeptical of how effective online learning is, and like because there were times when the COVID-19 situation and we kind of have to like, no, this is so ineffective, like this is not gonna replace school, right? Like how are we, I really want to go back to school. How effective do you think online learning is?
I think online learning can be effective, but I think there are 3 preconditions for that, right? And this is even coming from someone who is doing a startup based on online learning. I think the first precondition is that if you're going to make online learning compulsory, we need to make sure that everyone in the country is able to access the technology that's required first. Otherwise, we're simply just going to create another type of inequality, which I think economists call it a digital divide. So you will create like one good experience for people who are able to access the digital world, and another different experience for people who are not able to access the digital world. The second precondition is I think we need to understand that a good online learning experience is not a matter of copying what happens offline and then pasting it on an online platform. So it's not a matter of, let's say, taking a camera into a classroom, filming that class and then sticking that 1 hour long video online, right? Because people's behavior offline, online is very different. In an offline setting, it's much easier for the teacher to be able to get the concentration level of the students. On an online platform, if you watch a 1 hour long learning video, it can be very, very boring. I think there was a meme that was shared around during online learning, during when COVID came, where they said like, this is what it feels like to learn online. It's a picture of a man looking at water running down a tap.
Oh really? I need to see that meme.
So
it should be insert here.
So if you want to have a good online learning experience, you need to design for online behavior. And this is what we at Study try to do as well. I don't want to say that we've succeeded, far from it, but we're trying our best to design a good online learning experience without copying what's happening offline. So in all our learning videos, we try not to have videos that last more than, let's say, 10 minutes. We try to break kind of each topic into learning journeys, where after every short video, you're always intercepted by a quiz to check if you actually understand what was taught in the previous video. We've just recently developed a new feature where you can have what we call in-video questions. So while the teacher is teaching. So for example, I can say like, if you agree with me, press yes. If you disagree with me, press no. Right?
Like a poll.
Yes, like a live poll, right? So these are little things we try to do to make it more engaging. The third precondition is that online learning on its own is not effective. I think it needs to be complemented with offline learning. So the most effective type of learning, especially for students at primary and secondary school level, is blended learning. And it goes back to that flipped classroom concept that I mentioned, in the sense that we should not think about displacing schools with technology, right? Like even as someone who creates an online learning application, I don't advocate displacing schools or teachers. But what I'm hoping that our app can do is that because we can allow students to access knowledge and information and content from their homes or anywhere they go, right? Hopefully this will enable teachers to unlock their time and free up their time to spend on skills development.
Yeah, I think we need to see the strength of online learning, which is very much different from the strength of offline learning experience, and really maximize the full benefit of that, I guess. That's amazing. Oh, I want to start learning online now. Unfortunately, this would be the last question. I wish we can continue for พี่ไอติมบอกพอแล้ว
No, I can continue.
Oh, really? เสียงแห้งแล้วเรียบร้อย I'm not sure, but I think people watching this, like, if they're like me, they're probably really hyped about, like, let's go change the education in Thailand already. But you know, I think this is what I believe. I believe that everybody is, to a certain degree, interested in education. And they want to see a better education, especially in Thailand, because they also believe that it's a route to everything else. But we feel a little bit powerless. Like for me, I'm really passionate about education from the very start, and that's why I decided to become an educator, to maybe hopefully make a more or less like a difference in the way that people learn. But let's say for other people in other sectors at individual level, I'm not sure if there is available, but is there anything else that we can do to help empower one another or help us learn, maybe not through education system or something like that, but to learn better? And also people around us, people, forน้องๆ, let's say, they're having a hard time studying. They feel like, I don't want to be learning something else apart from school anymore. I'm so tired with the tests and exams and everything. So what we do is like, ตั้งใจเรียนลูกๆ ตั้งใจเรียน. It's kind of hard, right? Is there anything else that we can do as individuals to help make it easier for young kids or people in our society to learn and develop their skills better?
Yeah. So I think let me separate my answer into two. The first half is on education, and then the second half is on learning. And I come to why I see those two words as slightly different, right? So I think on education, right? Education is basically kind of learning programs that are set by the government and are delivered to students, right? So whether it's primary schools, pre-primary, secondary schools, universities, vocational schools, right? And I think for me, when we talk about how to improve the quality of education, I think for me, the role of education is to equip students to be ready for the future. I think that's essentially the essence of education. Now, to make that possible, I think there are 2 or 3 things that an education system should do. Number one is you want to equip students with the right skills. So you want to make sure that the skills that they pick up during their school time are relevant to what is required for them to find a job or to pursue their passions, right? So things like financial literacy, things like entrepreneurial skills, which we feel are going to be something which is quite important, right?
Right.
Number 2 is I think equipping them with not the skills to find a job, but the skills to live in a society together with other citizens, to be an active citizen. So for example, not just equipping them with the skills to find a job, but equipping them with the knowledge to know how they can alter their daily lives to save the environment, how they can learn to understand what entails kind of sexual harassment, to make sure that they don't do those acts and they prevent others from doing those acts as well. So equipping them with the knowledge to be able to live together in a society that full of diversity, but also filled with a lot of new problems, right? And then I think the third role of education is enabling students to explore themselves during that time in schools, which is how do you make sure that when students are going through that education period during primary and secondary school, they have enough time to explore what they like and what they don't like. So if you end up forcing them to attend schools like many hours per week, many weeks per year, they're not going to have enough time to conduct that exploration. They're not going to have enough time to go and talk to people who do different professions to find out what they want to do, right? But they're going to be too busy studying in the classroom, too busy going to tuition centers, too busy cramming for exams, right? So I think that for me is the role of education. So that's something which any educator out there or anyone who's passionate about education, I think can help to voice out and to try and move our education system towards that state. But for me, education is different from learning because while education could be seen as starting at kind of pre-primary schools and stopping at higher education,
right.
Learning is something which is there, unfortunately, for life, right?
Exactly.
We cannot say that, okay, once we graduated, then we don't want to learn anymore, right? But unfortunately, learning is something which we need to do for the rest of our lives because there are knowledge and skills that we need to update ourselves. There are things that we need to learn on the job. So then the question becomes, how do you motivate people to be willing to learn new things consistently? And this is very worrying because if you look at the latest report by the C Group, I think they did a research together with the World Economic Forum. If you compare the proportion of students in ASEAN countries who say that they felt that what they know from school is enough for the rest of their lives, Thailand has the highest proportion of students who believe that, which is something which I think we need to try and tackle and to generate that understanding. Actually, while your education life in schools might have ended, the requirement for you to learn new things is still needed. But it shouldn't be presented in a way as to make them more stressed. But I think we need to create an environment where if you admit to not knowing something, it's not something to be embarrassed about. You need to normalize that idea that, oh, I don't know something, I want to learn something. But I think in Thailand, there's still that kind of norm that if you don't know something, let's say if someone asks me a question and I don't know the answer to that question, it feels like, oh, I've done something wrong. Like me not knowing that is such a big mistake, right? When actually it's not, right? Most of us don't know most things. So that receptiveness to learning new things, that ability to see yourself as a glass kind of half empty and kind of filling up that glass with new knowledge all the time, I think is important. So that's something which I think we individually can adjust our own mindset as well.
So eventually, could it become like a new culture? Could it be like the learning culture that everyone is now keen on learning? Do you see the future of people keening to learn and improve?
I think that's what we need to create, not just in schools, but in your own homes, in companies as well. For example, like corporate learning is going to become much more important when employees need to update themselves with new skills. When jobs are being more and more displaced by technology, it's important that almost all companies or all corporates turn into some sort of university for their employees, right? Make sure that employees are able to learn new skills without having to leave their jobs and then go and enroll in a course at university. So I think creating that culture of lifelong learning is important, but all of that is only possible if we are able to create a culture where not knowing something is not seen as something negative. That I think is crucial to making sure that we can get that growth mindset and that lifelong learning culture.
And hence the lessons learned.
Yes.
แล้วก็โยงเข้าเรื่องตัวเองได้ One last. I promise you. I already said that's the last question, but one last question. I forgot my question. Like the people that are learning something right now and struggling. Any message for them to keep learning? Even for you, like I think now that you mentioned about the growth mindset a little bit, and I think people often think, of course, P.A. Team, of course you're great. Like you went to this Eton College and you went to Oxford and you have this great opportunity and blah blah blah. But for me, like I feel like I don't feel like there's much that I can do now. I'm not as intelligent. I'm not as empower. Like I don't see how I can grow more with my skills, and it's so difficult. Oh, learning English is so difficult. I cannot speak. Oh, learning maths is like blah blah blah. Entrepreneurship, other things. It's like sometimes we feel overwhelmed, right? What kind of message do you have for them?
Yeah, I think firstly it's okay to feel overwhelmed, right?
Right.
Like everyone feels it. I mean, when I went through my studies, there were also times where I felt a bit down, where I felt a bit stressed. I felt that I couldn't keep up with what I had to learn, right? But I think two things that you can kind of, I guess, do to motivate yourself and to not feel too bad about it. I think number one is try to keep reminding yourself that it's not the end of the world if you don't know something or if you can't do something, right? I say this as someone who, when I was younger, felt exactly that. As in, right, when let's say like, when I'm preparing for an exam, I feel like, oh no, if I fail this, it's going to be the end of the world. As someone who's kind of passed through that experience and is on the other side of the education system, having kind of graduated already and working and entered kind of working life, it's really not the end of the world, right? You're not going to be judged forever based on how much you scored in your kind of grade 6 English exam or grade 9 maths exam. You're not even going to be judged by which university you go to, but you're kind of, as someone who recruits people all the time, right, at our company, we care more about your skill sets, what kind of jobs you've done, how much you've contributed to organizations that you worked with in the past, and how willing you are to learn, how much of a kind of, what is your attitude towards being coached and being kind of asked to perform new tasks or new roles, right? That kind of attitude, that mindset is much more important than what is your GPA or what university you went to, right? So I think that's something which I think hopefully is something which can help kind of de-stress a lot of people who are feeling overwhelmed with their studies. It's really not the end of the world, and it's something which we need to try and, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Learning is a marathon. So whenever you feel like you are becoming too stressed, you are not living like a happy life, then try and find time to take a break, and don't overstress that what you're facing or what exam you're doing is going to be kind of the all and all of your life.
So it doesn't matter where you are now or in the past, like what you have done before, but from now on, like how you're gonna move forward, it's even more important, I guess. Right? Yeah. From now, listening to P. Tim and feel inspired. Okay, I think that should be very much it, but I think we need the second episode already. เราคงต้องมี EP ที่ 2 แล้วแหละ Anything else you want to leave for our audience today, P. Tim?
I think I leave with one final tip, which is it's okay to make a mistake, right? Especially for people who are watching and trying to learn English, right? Like, what's much more important than getting your grammar or vocabulary 100% correct is to try and use the language more frequently. Because at the end of the day, language is just about communicating, right? So provided you can get your message across, even if your tense is not completely perfect, even if your pronunciation is not completely perfect, I think it's okay to make those mistakes and you learn along the way. Much more important to use the language than to know the language. And it's okay to make mistakes, but just keep trying not to make old mistakes, but to keep making new mistakes.
Ooh, yay! That's right. I think I just did like hundreds of mistakes today. Those are new mistakes, I hope.
But it's okay. We had a good conversation, so you were able to get your message across. I'm sure I made a few mistakes as well. I'm able to get my message across. So that's all there is to language.
Yay! We didn't talk about the language much, so that's why episode 2 is coming. ขายไว้ก่อนโอเคขอบคุณทุกคนมากๆเลยนะคะที่ติดตามกัน Okay, thank you so much for watching and listening to our show, and that's it for today. Bye.